Okay, last month we continued with the subsection entitled The Centers and the Senses, Normal and Supernormal. We began our last session by considering how the centers awaken within the three lower sheaths and on the three lower planes. The longest period by far takes place on the physical etheric plane, described here, when the centers awaken over a period of millions of years, spanning that period between individualization and the probationary path. Interrelated with the awakening, let me turn my video on here. Interrelated with this awakening and during this same period, the five physical plane senses also become more refined, thus allowing for complete identification of the indweller, the imprisoned jiva, with his or her outer sheaths. That's the whole point during this first phase. And we tend to study these things separately, for instance, the senses and the chakras, but actually the increasing the energy in either awakens the other. So when our senses become more acute, it also stimulates our chakras and vice versa. Okay, the second stage, which begins when one steps onto the probationary path and lasts till the first initiation, is the awakening of the centers on the astral plane, which is, quote, paralleled by the tremendously keen use of the senses for the purposes of discriminating between the self and the not self. So in the first phase, the whole thing is to learn about the not self, the outer sheaths, to get familiar with life in the three worlds, right? When one moves to this stage, which begins at the probationary path, where you begin to explore and come into awareness of the astral plane, the purpose shifts and becomes it becomes the point of it is to learn to discriminate between the self and the not self, and that, from our point of view, seems to be quite a long phase, but it's nothing. I would say most of us are in that phase. But it's nothing compared to the first phase where you're just learning about your outer world. And then the third stage, which begins after the first initiation, involves awakening of the centers on the mental plane and within the mental sheath, leading to, quote, identification of the self, that's the indweller, with its own essence in all groups, and the rejection of the sheaths and the forms. So that which you learn to become familiar with during the first phase, the outer realm, you are now going through the process of disidentifying with your three outer sheaths, right? DK then tells us that during the stage of astral awakening, there is a response from the Buddhic plane and a vibratory interplay between the vortices within the Buddhic sheath and the centers in the astral sheath. Quote, the force of the triad can be felt definitely in the personality via the astral. So, I was surprised by this teaching because we normally think of any kind of activity in Atma Buddhi Manas being for those who have achieved a stage of enlightenment, third initiation or higher. But here we're being told that work on and within the astral sheath, which I would say we're all in process of doing, does have this stimulation of the Buddhic vortices, which are the chakras within our Buddhic body or sheath. A parallel energetic exchange happens when the vortices within the atmic sheath and the centers in the mental body begin to interact. And that's also during the third stage, later part of the third stage, right? So you have this Atma Buddhic response to activating the chakras within your astral and mental bodies. And my guess is that they're probably play a huge part in helping you one to awaken the astral and Buddhic centers. And next we took a look at the footnote referenced by the phrase from the point of view of fire, wherein we learned about how electric fire, solar fire, and fire by friction manifests through 1, a solar logos, as shown here, 2, a planetary logos, and 3, a human being from the perspective of his or her 7 principles. And this takes us up to where we left off last time. The footnote finishes on the next page, and it says, physical plane man manifests in the 3 worlds: electric fire, the higher self; solar fire, the 7 centers; fire by friction, the sheath. So first, physical plane man manifests in the 3 worlds. DK here gives us physical plane man as he manifests in the 3 worlds, in contradistinction to the previous grouping, and man, the microcosm, manifests through his vehicles, which includes all the 7 principles, all the higher human principles, Atma-Buddhi, Manas, and the monadic principles. Whereas here we're looking at someone within the lower quaternary, in physical incarnation. So this is, interestingly, it's a distinct category. So first of these is electric fire, the higher self. Well, the higher self doesn't mean the monad here, as you would expect, because normally electric fire is associated with the monad. But from the point of view of physical plane man in incarnation, the higher self is a combination of monad and spiritual triad, as they are expressed through the ego. From the point of view of an incarnated human being, this is the highest possible expression, and thus represents electric fire. By the way, as you know, it's always more interesting when we have a conversation than me just lecturing. So, you know, anytime you have any questions, I'm looking at the chats now. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Yeah, just raise your hand. Don't be shy if you have any thoughts or questions about what we're reading about. Okay, so we're talking about these 3 principles, these 3 kinds of fire for the incarnated human being. So the second, solar fire, is associated with the 7 centers. So earlier in TCF, DK tells us that the chakras are initiated into activity by the monad. The fact that they are here associated with solar fire just tells us how relative these 3 fires are to the level of consciousness from which they are being experienced. For the 7 chakras can only be seen as an expression of solar fire from the perspective of an incarnated human being. From an overall perspective, they would be seen as either first part of the first aspect or the third aspect. But in this particular context, again, it just shows you that these 3 fires are experienced differently according to one's level of, or one's perspective and level of consciousness. Finally, we have fire by friction, the sheaths. So the substance of a human being's mental, astral, and physical etheric sheath are ruled by fire by friction, because that's the fire that actually creates these sheaths. Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay. Hey, Barbara, yes.
Yes, so um, electric fire, just as we might have an association with it, it is actually is moving. It seems to be a force that penetrates. um, Solar fire. Since it's on the centers, um, may actually have a center, and since the centers are spiraling, there may be an expansion from that. Um, The fire by friction is harder to imagine within the sheaths or the bodies. I mean, we know that there's subtle matter, um, and that subtle matter may even be something like molecular, but I would appreciate knowing a little bit more about fire
Sure,
by
sure.
sheaths.
Yeah, well, thank you, Barbara. First of all, electric fire is uh, draws the form aspect towards the indwelling spirit, and ultimately, its purpose is the destruction of the form, but not until the purpose of the form has been complete. Um, until that time, the dominant fire is the solar fire. That's you could call it the fire that initiates becoming, the fire that allows us to realize the purpose of the sheaths that we are using at any given time. Right. That's the fire of evolution, really. So electric fire is used uh, in the destruction of the forms when the time comes for that to happen. Solar fire in the sustaining and of the forms for the period of time that we need them, and also because it's allied with second aspect and the second ray, it draws to the indweller, the imprisoned jiva, the the new and more appropriate forms. Um, and once that occurs, then electric fire does the work of destruction. So those two work together in that way. Fire by friction is actually fairly simple, Barbara. It's just form construction. So it's literally the material aspect that makes up the forms, that makes up the substance of the forms, the substance of the sheaths at whatever level. So you can have fire by friction working on in uh, in fact, he makes it real clear in this section that fire by friction also works on the mental plane, to create the mental sheaths. So it's, very Davic in its process. Um, Dave is guiding the lesser builders to create the appropriate forms as dictated by the second aspect, which wields solar fire. Does that help at all?
Yes, it does. So electric fire then might have some will or some power associated.
Yeah, it does. And it's the ultimately, it's, it's all from the perspective it's all has to do with your perspective. So it's seen as destructive from the lower perspective, right? From
Mhm.
one, but from the higher perspective, it's seen as the fire of liberation. And it's never what you call inappropriately applied. So it's only when someone has achieved what can be achieved within that form nature. A perfect example is the Kundalini process. At some point, the whole lower system of chakras within the etheric physical sheath has um, completed its purpose. You know, the fires of matter have blended with the fires of mind, drawn the fire of spirit downwards. And at that point, the electric fire, quote unquote, burneth up the whole, you know, so that liberation ensues and the indwelling jiva, now liberated, inhabits his or her Buddhic sheath. And at some point, that sheath will be burned, but not for a very long time.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Anybody else? Yeah, Nadell. Hi.
Yeah, I have a question I hope is somewhat related. Um, the whole issue of primordial ray infusing matter with intelligence. Can you speak a little bit what your understanding of what it means to say that matter has intelligence? I tend to think of matter as just being this stuff that we use to build forms, but what does it mean to say it actually has inherent intelligence?
Yeah, it's it's one of those puzzlers, no doubt. Because we don't uh, we think of matter in terms of the stuff around us. You pick something up and that's material, but in fact, it's there is no that is a very elusive, or to use the right term, myopic reality. What it really is a series of tiny little lives that are guided by a force that holds whatever form they're creating, that holds that in manifestation until it is no longer appropriate for that form to exist, right? And so that could be called the intelligence of matter, that form holding ability that is actually applied by the second aspect. Um, Even though it's so the response of the third aspect to that guiding second aspect is the intelligence of matter, right? Also, uh, um, active intelligence is the acme of the third aspect, which at this point in time takes one up through lower mind. So the epitome of achievement of the third aspect, with at least within the human kingdom, is lower mind activity, intelligent activity, right? As soon as one begins to be informed by higher mind, then there's a blend of second and third aspect. Of course, from another point of view, just like with simple forms, where it's the form building solar energy that actually guides the process of creating the lower forms, just as in that case, it's the solar angels that enable any kind of intelligence to take place at all, right? So it's your categories can get kind of schmoosed there, but at individualization, a solar angel overshadows, and the spark of manas is comes alive, and for eons, it's an outer development towards recognition of the outer world. All that could be called the third aspect of active intelligence, even though it's initiated by the soul or the second aspect. then, and we're going to actually this time be going through these 3 stages. And then at a certain point, when one begins to respond to their soul directly, rather than just as the overshadowing unconscious element, um, and thereby enters onto the probationary path, when that occurs, then one begins to respond to solar fire, which is a function of higher mind informing the lower mind. I don't know if that helps at all, but
Yeah, I think it's very helpful to say that the form holding ability, in effect, that matter has the ability to respond to that force that's coming in to hold it together.
yeah.
That's helpful.
Okay, well, another way to look at it is, cosmically speaking, is that the previous solar system was all about developing matter to the point that it had that high threshold, that it could respond to intelligent activity, right? DK tells us, and this is an astonishing fact, that in the next solar system, ruled by the first ray, substance will have inherent in it the love nature, which is really just, I mean, it's an amazing concept, but it's hard to imagine how that could possibly be. But that's the teaching, that what happens, is that during the incarnation of the solar logos, that which is being worked on, in this case, the second aspect, perfection of the second aspect, literally permeates into the substantive realm. So that by the end of that incarnation, that energy then becomes an aspect of that lowest quality of the substantive aspect. So one would guess then that by the end of the final solar system, that when the spirit nature permeates a substance aspect, that it will be a form of positive self-destruction, meaning simply that all that can be learned within the substantive world, within the form world, will have been learned, and there will be a self-initiated ascension through the hierarchies.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
you bet. Yes, Tom.
Would you say then that on the molecular level, the repulsion and attraction that makes chemical things happen would be part of the intelligence of the matter, or would it be more the movement side or force side of the thing? Just the fact that there would be chemical reactions.
Yeah, I think it's an unconscious demonstration of the intelligence of substance, guided by the form building aspect. See, there's nothing, there is no, everything is all matter participates in form building. And that form building is overseen by the second aspect, right? So, the building blocks are pure substance, but their coming together in any form whatsoever is guided by the hand of, you could say, of the second aspect. Anything from the soul nature to the whole entire David kingdom, except those lowest elementals whose little lives are the substantive world. Yeah, it would be fascinating to, just have like a physics textbook, and then on one page you have the description as we know it in academic world, and then on the other page you have a DK explanation of what's actually going on, in terms of how what's happening on the left on the page that describes the physics, how that is the manifestation of these internal laws, right? Laws of attraction and repulsion, for instance, as you mentioned. Yes, Carol.
Two questions. One is, are those numbers referring at all to the rays, the 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah, they're not the same as, but active intelligence is one of the names of the third ray, and intelligent activity is an aspect of fire by friction. So in that way, you have an association. Solar fire is the second aspect. Wheeled solar power, solar fire, that is the soul aspect, and it's guided by, or its essence is a demonstration of consciousness through love wisdom. So that in that way, it is an exponent of the second ray. Same thing with electric fire, which is the most difficult to actually name. They call it will, power. In some ways, it's more accurate just to go to the Hindu, the Shiva aspect, because of it's a finer description of the nature of that rather than just will and power. But DK often uses those terms, and that uses electric fire for its own ends, which is to draw the imprisoned jiva back to its own source.
Well, my other question related to with the egoic mode is very, well, we would consider it the end, where it seems to have, I guess, burned off. That's what's making, and then you connect more with your monad. Would it be one of these three fires?
Yeah, well, I think, this is for instance, the shattering of the causal body is a function of electric fire. And that electric fire is an extension of the monadic presence. So when one gets in touch with the monad at the third initiation, then this fire begins its work. And at the fourth initiation, all that the form has served its purpose. It's really important to underscore that. You never have wanton destruction, right? It's the destruction clears and frees the indweller, right? So when the causal body is destroyed through electric fire, then the indweller emerges, and it's now a soul-infused personality that relates directly to the monad, and it embodies the energy of solar fire at that point, and is responding to the monad vibration of electric fire, one could say. Whereas we, at a personality level, are demonstrating through intelligent activity, but gradually responding to our soul, which wields solar fire, that eventually stimulates higher mind, and we step onto the probationary path.
Thank you. Excellent answers.
Oh, good. Anyone else?
We have one comment, two comments from the same person. Swaha, Swaha. As one evolves, one must learn to use the forces of destruction constructively, a requirement for those who are more evolved, as energies hold the power to destroy. The more evolved individuals' very being holds a vibration that holds the power to destroy the unreal. Action, i.e. karma, Saturn leading to consequences, plus awareness, plus restraint, harmlessness, two great laws.
Yeah, well said. Right. A part of what comes to us as we evolve is our ability to wield. And what we're wielding initially, it's love, isn't it? It's, you wield love in order to relate and thus expand the association of the form aspect and literally draw forms together into a greater form, right? But at a certain point, and this is also by ray, for instance, a first ray egoic type will be called upon after much purification and lives spent, by the way, as a second ray personality, so that the love wisdom permeates her consciousness. Then they can be considered. It can be considered that it's safe for them to wield what you could call positive destruction, clearing away that which is no longer of use. So, yeah, well said. Okay, shall we go on? Anyone else? Good discussion. All right. Yeah, so that finishes this footnote, which covered, we finished in the middle of it last time, and it involved these three qualities: electric fire, solar fire, and fire by friction at the level of a solar logos, a planetary logos, a human being from the perspective of its entire seven principles, and finally a physical plane, human in incarnation, right? So now we go back to the text. Could we get a reader, please?
Barbara, you want to read?
Yes. From the point of view of fire, leaving the aura and its colors out of temporary consideration, the evolutionary development marks an equally definite process. A, the vivification of the inner heat of the sheaths, or the tiny point of fire latent in every individual atom of matter. This process proceeds in all three bodies, at first slowly, then more rapidly, and finally simultaneously and synthetically. B, the bringing into activity from latency of the seven centers on all planes, beginning from the bottom upwards until the centers, according to ray and type, are interrelated and coordinated. There are manifest 35 vortices of fire in the perfected adept, all of radiant activity and all interacting. C, the vortices or wheels of lambent flame become interlinked by triangles of fire, which pass and circulate from one to another, till we have a web of fiery lines uniting centers of living fire and giving truth to the statement that the sons of mine are flames.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, first, from the point of view of fire, leaving the aura and its colors out of temporary consideration, the evolutionary development marks an equally definite process. So DK has, just prior to this statement, been presenting material on the awakening of the chakras by means of the senses in the physical, etheric, astral, and mental sheaths, right? And he made the point that activity, when one further awakens the fire of any particular chakra or set of chakras, that there is an equivalent sharpening of the senses that they're not completely separate ideas, but that they're very much interrelated. Now, having made that point, he's now will continue his theme of awakening, but from the point of view of fire, which in terms of its effect on evolutionary development, quote, marks an equally definite process equal to the awakening of the senses and of the chakras. So everything he says here is strictly in terms of fire. So DK's first item from the point of view of fire is a vivification of the inner heat of the sheaths, or the tiny point of fire latent in every individual atom of matter. This process proceeds in all three bodies, at first slowly, then more rapidly, and finally simultaneously and synthetically. So DK tells us earlier in this treatise that latent fire, also called latent heat, is, quote, the basis of rotary motion and the cause of the spheroidal coherent manifestation of all existence, from the logoic atom, the solar ring pass knot, down to the minutest atom of the chemist or physicist. Here we discover that latent heat exists in the atoms of substance that make up all three sheaths, astral, mental, as well as the physical etheric sheath. In the section on Kundalini fire, we learned that over long eons, latent fire blends first with the pranic fires, then with the fires of mind, and finally with the fire of spirit, which, quote unquote, burneth up the whole. Okay. These systems are so deeply interrelated that whenever we can, it's good to look at, when he describes one system, to keep in mind what's happening in a whole other system, a whole other way of looking at it. So, for instance, as this latent fire in every individual atom of matter in all three bodies is increasing its radiatory quality, well, that directly translates into the rising of the Kundalini. It directly translates into the sensitizing oneself of the senses and coming into awareness of the higher senses. And of course, it's the all the chakras are also responding to this fire. He tends to separate out the senses, and we learn of them individually, but it's important to realize that they're part and parcel of the same process. Okay. So next up, B, the bringing into activity from latency of the seven centers on all planes, beginning from the bottom upwards until the centers, according to ray and type, are interrelated and coordinated. So this is an example of the function of fire. There are manifest 35 vortices, he tells us, of fire in the perfected adept, all of radiant activity and all interacting. This introduces a huge topic. 7 chakras in each of 5 vehicles or sheaths gives us the 35 vortices that he here describes. 7 each in the physical, astral, mental, buddhic, and monadic vehicles. The only info in the above statement on how these 35 vortices are sequentially activated is, quote, beginning from the bottom upwards. The phrase, according to ray, probably means according to the ray of the monad, which the statement suggests determines the order of chakric unfoldment. For example, a second ray monad most likely transfers energy from the solar plexus to the heart before a first or third ray monad does. We can only imagine the beauty and the beauty of the geometric interplay of fire circulating between 35 chakras of the perfected adept. You know, for the high clairvoyant, the one who has divine vision and could actually see this interrelation of 5 sheaths and all 35 vortices and full display. Finally, see the vortices or wheels of lambent flame become interlinked by triangles of fire, which pass and circulate from one to another till we have a web of fiery lines, uniting centers of living fire and giving truth to the statement that the sons of mind are flames. So before I get into description, yes, Barbara.
Yes. So ordinarily, the monad is not identified as one of the sheaths.
Right, it's true. Yeah, that's because we think of the sheaths of the monad, you know, and that, so Amma Buddhi Manas are the highest sheaths of the monad. But it is made up of monadic substance, and the truly sheathless, to coin a phrase, would only occur on the atmic plane, because the monad is, you know, it participates in that paradox of being a point and having a monadic constitution, and yet being non-individual. It's singular but not isolated, right? So, yeah, we just have to take him at his word that you're looking at, let's see, 5. Oh, wait a minute here now. What did I say? Let me go back here, see what I said. Well, it would be physical, astral, mental, Buddhic, and Atmic. What did I say? I did say monad, didn't I? I think that's wrong. I think you're right, Barbara, and thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, you're looking at, wait a minute, here we go. This is what I said. 7 chakras in each of 5 vehicles, 7 each in the physical, astral, mental, Buddhic. Oh no, it should be Atmic vehicles, not monadic. Let me correct that. Thanks for picking that up. Yeah, and these together then form the, you could say, the perfected expression of the monad.
So sometimes there's a description of high adepts with 49 vortices of fire.
Right, and see, that would be 2 more groups of 7, you know, suggesting what? What would that suggest? I mean, that would equate to all the subplanes of the cosmic, of all 7 of the cosmic physical planes. So if one has a monadic sheath and a logoic sheath, then, you know, that would represent those 49. I've never seen that. I'd like to read that statement and, you know, see if there's any context that would maybe explain what is meant by those 49 fires. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we were talking about C here. The vortices or wheels of lambent flame become interlinked by triangles of fire. No, I read that. Okay, yeah, so the description of this. The dictionary defines lambent, he uses this word lambent, as glowing or gleaming with a soft radiance. I suspect DK's use of the word suggests a more profound radiatory demonstration of living fire. I mean, obviously it does, because it's going to be fire within the cosmic etheric levels, Mabuni Manas. As we learned in the section on Kundalini, the centers eventually form rotating triangles of fire. But new here is the idea that these triangles of living fire, extend all the way up to our Atmic sheaths. Yeah, it was just a misprint, because I write Atmic here, so I don't know why I put monadic. The statement, the sons of mind are flames, links us with our monads, about which DK says, finally, there is the monadic flame divine. This embodies the highest vibration of which the monad is capable, is governed by the law of synthesis, and is the cause of the forward progressive movement of the evolving jiva. Yes, Joe.
I think that I've always started from the individual point of view, and we were talking Kundalini, of course, but after all these years of being on the path, it struck me when I heard the word rotary, that we're not talking only, we're not, I'll say it a different way, that we're actually beginning to see the formation of a planet, for example, because I'm thinking about Pluto, where there's been the astronomical argument that, well, it is a planet, no, it's not a planet, and then eventually they come around to the fact that they are a whole sphere makes them a planet. And so at least we'll draw the conclusion that both the evolvement of a planet and the evolvement of a soul to a monadic level are similar.
Yeah, and if you've seen the Astrolabe program's extension of a planet's, well, this is Walter Poulin's program, and he has created an animation of a planet moving through space, and it only seems to be rotary motion, that it's actually a very elongated spiralic motion, trailing, you could say, behind, at least so it appears in the animation, this solar logos who's plunging ahead in what seems to be direct motion. And I like this because it shows the relative states of these motions, right? Because we know also that the solar logos is rotating around it's said around the Pleiades, and that HPB reveals that it takes 100,000 years to rotate around the Pleiades. And that's from a very much higher perspective than the solar logos can be seen demonstrating rotary motion, spiralic motion in relation to the 7 solar systems, of which our solar logos is one, and direct motion from the point of view of the consciousness within our solar system. So it's all according to one's perspective, how these motions and how these 3 energies are considered. They're relative realities, not absolute realities. Yes, Nisa.
I recently saw a brief, I think it was a YouTube little video by that popular scientist. I think his name is Lagrassi or something. Anyway, he was talking about how the moon and the earth move, and evidently the moon doesn't exactly go around the earth, but that the earth and the moon both move around kind of like another point.
Hmm.
And that then he was showing, whoever it was showing, and it was like a spiralic movement that the earth actually does because of its dance with the moon. It was really interesting, but you're talking about spiral movement.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a point of there's a relative center of gravity between those two bodies that is not the middle of the Earth, like we imagine. The moon just rotates around the Earth, and the center of the Earth is that point which the moon rotates around. But that's not the case because the moon's gravitation also participates in the process. So even though the Earth greatly dominates the process because it's so much larger, nonetheless, it's a kind of spiraling around each other, even though it appears the moon is doing the spiraling. And of course, it's not a perfect spiral either, because all you have to do is look at it from the perspective of their dual motion around the sun, and you see that it's actually a much more complex double spiral that is occurring. Thank you, Nisa. Anyone else? Okay, so he's next up. DK's list of the effects of fire continues. Can we get a reader, please?
Harold, do you feel like reading?
Did you say Carol?
Yeah.
Good. I was looking for my hand up. I will try. Not too well today. These centers reach the condition of perfection as the will of spirit aspect takes even fuller control. The unifying triangles are produced by the action of the fire of mind, while the fire of matter holds the form together in ordered sequence. So the interdependence of matter, mind, and spirit can be seen and demonstrated to the eye of the clairvoyant as the coordination of the three fires. In the heavenly man and his body, a chain of globes likewise can be seen, and we need here to remember very carefully that the 7 chains of a scheme are the expression of the planetary logos. The heavenly men are expressing themselves through a scheme of 7 chains, and the emphasis has been laid duly, perhaps upon the dense physical planet and in any particular chain. This has caused the fact of the chain importance to be somewhat overlooked. Each of the 7 chains might be looked upon as picturing the 7 centers of one of the heavenly men. The idea of the group of egos forming centers in the heavenly men is nevertheless correct, but in this connection, the reference is to the centers of force on the Buddhic and monadic levels.
Okay, while I'm thinking of a piece of housekeeping, last 2 weeks ago, we had a treatise on cosmic fire. We had 8 people. And the reason for that is that the announcement didn't go out. And so the reason I'm mentioning that is that if you're keen on this material, you may want to go onto either Makara or YouTube and watch the last TCF webinar just to catch up, because it's all but 8 of you are missing a space in terms of the material covered. So just a heads up on that. Okay, so first up, these centers reach this condition of perfection, talking about chakras here, as the spirit or will aspect takes ever fuller control. It's interesting to note that all the senses of the Atmic plane have to do with creating a, quote, condition of perfection, with the sense of taste literally called perfection. So Master of Wisdom utilizes these perfected senses throughout his 5 perfected sheaths. This also goes to what we were talking about before, that this condition of perfection is the same as it. To say that it's a condition of perfection is the same as saying that the first aspect is in control of the unit of consciousness, right? And that first aspect permeating the chakras of such a one is what allows this high initiate to function through these Atmic senses. It's all co-eval. They're all happening together, right? Next. The unifying triangles are produced by the action of the fire of mind, while the fire of matter holds the form together in ordered sequence. So the fire of matter sustains, in ordered sequence, the structure of the energy system, right? The Kundalini is an etheric structure, but the fire at the center is not etheric matter. You know, in this case, it's the fire of mind, which is solar fire, enables the interplay between the centers. So you have the structure, and then you have the interplay of the fire, and then you have the essence of the fire itself. And those are the 3 principles. You know, the structure is the third aspect, the interplay is the second, and the essence at the core of the fire is first aspect. Next, so the interdependence of matter, mind, and spirit can be seen and demonstrates to the eye of the clairvoyant as the coordination of the 3 fires. Well, I just described that. The latent and pranic fires of matter circulate and blend with the fire of mind. This calls forth the fire. So, you know, it's always a series of blending. You know, the first is the latent fire that issues forth from the Muladhara, the base of the spine, and begins its interaction with the pranic triangle, which is also considered a third aspect fire. They blend together, and then that through a series of triangles eventually interacts with and merges with the fire of mind, and when that happens, that calls down the fire of spirit. And at that point, you get fourth dimensional movement, and the entire system is being drawn into synthesis. A clairvoyant sees etheric and presumably astral etheric matter. You know, he mentions demonstrates to the eye of the clairvoyant as a coordination of the 3 fires. So a clairvoyant sees etheric and presumably astral etheric matter, but to see the matter on mental levels would require higher clairvoyance. And to see the coordination of 3 fires representing the interdependence of matter, mind, and spirit, it seems to me, would require divine vision, since spirit demonstrating as fire would be at least a Buddhic plane phenomenon. Next. In the heavenly man and his body, a chain of globes So we're going macrocosmic here. He's defined the system and the process of becoming for the microcosm. So now we have in the heavenly man and his body a chain of globes, likewise can be seen. And we need here to remember very carefully that the 7 chains of a scheme are the expression of a planetary logos. Okay, Mikhail can hear. Let me do it. Somebody's bleeding through its own svaha. Let me mute them. They're muted. Okay. So if you've spoken, please re-mute yourself so that doesn't happen. Okay. In the heavenly man and his body, a chain of globes likewise can be seen, and we need here to remember very carefully that the 7 chains of a scheme are the expression of a planetary logos. Keeping in mind the context of fire, the 7 chains here represent the centers in the body of a heavenly man. We tend to think of the chains as unfolding one by one. It's a sequential event, but they also are the centers in the body of the heavenly man. It's difficult to imagine how that could be, but such is the case. Just as the 7 sacred planets are the centers in a solar logos. DK seems to infer that corresponding fiery triangles are formed between the chains, just as they are in the centers of a human being. In this case, it would be as below, so above, right? The chakras of a chain lord are formed by the 7 globes that make up that chain in the same way. The footnote referenced by the term, a chain of globes, is quite extensive, exploring 11 aspects of a planetary logoi, as well as the great beings under their influence. These footnotes, by the way, which occur throughout TCF, are DK's way of including what he considers to be significant other teachings. Most of the time they're HPBs, not always. Once in a while they're from other sources. But this one is all comes from the secret doctrine. And so he's, without having to rewrite this information, he's able to include it just through the footnotes. People tend to skip over footnotes. Was happy to have to take on the discipline of really exploring these footnotes. And indeed, they're very much worth the trouble. So let's take them one by one. Of course, we're not going to read everything that is said in every footnote. We'd be here for 3 more sessions. That's not the point. It's to get the essence of each of these. So first, the planetary chains, the 7 heavenly men from the sun and the 7 sacred planets. So the 7 heavenly men form the sun and the 7 sacred planets. So first we have to address the apparent number discrepancy. How can 7 heavenly men form the sun and 7 sacred planets? One possible explanation is that, esoterically speaking, Vulcan and the sun are one, which, along with the other 6 heavenly men, form the 7 etheric centers of the solar logos, and thus represent the sum total of solar expression. The first short passage from the Secret Doctrine comes from an old commentary. It's quite short. Quote, "The 7 allow the mortals to see their dwellings," talk about the 7 heavenly men, "but show themselves only to the arhats," says an old proverb, "their dwellings standing here for planets." So this means that mortal humanity, on whatever planet, sees, quote unquote, the progressive series of globes that form their habitation, but only third degree initiates and above are capable of seeing the great initiator who informs these globes. We'll take up the second quote, this one from page 155 of The Secret Doctrine, as a kind of mini tutorial on the transfer of life from one chain of globes to the next. Could we get a reader, please? This is the material of this second footnote.
Yeah, Gordon, you wanna?
When a planetary chain is in its last round, its globe 1, or A, before finally dying out, sends all its energy and principles into a neutral center of latent force, a Laya center, and thereby informs a new nucleus of undifferentiated substance or matter, i.e., calls it into activity or gives it life. Suppose such a process to have taken place in the lunar planetary chain. Suppose again, for argument's sake, that the moon is far older than the Earth. Imagine the 6 fellow globes of the moon, eons before the first globe of R7 was evolved, just in the same position in relation to each other as the fellow globes of our chain occupy in regard to our Earth now. And now it will be easy to imagine further globe A of the lunar chain informing globe A of the terrestrial chain, and dying globe B of the former sending after that its energy into globe B of the new chain, then globe C of the lunar creating its progeny sphere C of the terrene chain, then the moon, our satellite, pouring forth into the lowest globe of our planetary ring, globe D, our Earth, all its life, energy, and powers. And having transferred them to a new center, becoming virtually a dead planet, in which rotation has almost ceased since the birth of our globe.
Thank you, Gordon. So those of you who are completely unfamiliar with this material, this probably just sounded like, a lot of gobbledygook. It's quintessential HPV stuff, and it's also the kind of stuff that DK doesn't cover, hence its inclusion in the footnote. So we're going to go through this step by step because it's actually an important and valuable teaching. So first, when a planetary chain is in its last round, its globe 1, or A, before finally dying out, sends all its energy and principles into a neutral center of latent force, a Laya center, and thereby informs a new nucleus of undifferentiated substance or matter, that is, calls it into activity or gives it life. So, when a planetary chain is in its last round, that is, when the life wave that passes through the 7 globes that make up a chain is on its 7th and last pass or round, globe 1, before finally dying out, sends all its energy and principles into a neutral center of latent force, a Laya center, and there informs a new nucleus of undifferentiated substance, calling it into activity and giving it life. Do you understand this? Everybody with me on this? Any thoughts or questions about how this works? This is all about the movement of the life wave from one chain to the next. And this is universally true, not just true of the 3rd to the 4th chain. Next, suppose such a process to have taken place in the lunar planetary chain. This is the moon chain. of which our moon is a vestige. Next, suppose again, for argument's sake, that the moon is far older than the Earth. Here, HPB sets up the stage for the moon being the fourth globe of the previous chain. Next, imagine the 6 fellow globes of the moon eons before the first globe of our 7 was evolved, just in the same position in relation to each other as the fellow globes of our chain occupy in regard to the Earth now. So here HPB posits the idea that the 7 globes of our current Earth chain occupy the same relative positions to each other as the 7 globes of the moon held in that distant time. What they have in common is the evolving life wave. They're altogether new planets for each chain, but the life wave, which we are part of, passes from one chain to the next via each separate globe. Here's a chart from the Secret Doctrine that relates the relative positions of the 7 planets of the moon and Earth chains. And it's, in 19th century fashion shows the density, right? So this is the moon, here, globe D, passing on to our Earth, right? And then, so in descending order, you have the most etheric, indicated by the clear circle of that previous chain, the lunar chain, passing on to the most etheric of our Earth chain, and then the next globe in terms of density passing on to the next globe on our Earth chain, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, you have the evolutionary process of the 5th globe or the E globe passing on to our next globe, which will be the Mercury globe, and it'll be less dense than our physical. Then finally, the 6th globe and the final or 7th globe, in which case there'll be a tremendously long pralaya period, and the whole thing starts again, but then between the 4th and the 5th chains rather than the 3rd and the 4th chains. Yes, Gordon.
I've read a little bit about this from other sources too, and what I was thinking is that in this kind of my understanding from that is in the 7th round, part of the life wave will transfer from like the lunar chain, globe A, to the Earth chain, globe A. And part of it also transfers from lunar A to lunar B. It's part of the 7th round. And then on B, again, part of lunar B will transfer to lunar C, and part of it will go to the Earth B. Do you think that's the case?
Most of the life wave transfers once the Earth chain, once the last globe of the lunar chain, globe G, has transferred its energy, and the Earth's chain becomes the new living. All the life essence is now on the Earth chain. Then the transfer goes from after globe A, which is the development of the mineral kingdom primarily, right? Then the life wave transfers from globe A to globe B, and from globe B to globe C, right? I could see how that would work, that you would have, because you have that fundamental process of transferring the life wave within a given chain, right? Which goes from A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, that you could also have a kind of cross from A to B, from chain to chain. But I haven't read that. You have to look very carefully at your source if this who wrote this, Yes, Gordon.
Okay, I'm not sure you're understanding what I'm saying. I'm saying this transfer in this footnote says this is occurring in the 7th round of the lunar chain.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that in the 7th round of the lunar chain, there's a life wave that passes from globe A of the lunar to globe B of the lunar, and B to C, passes around the globes in the lunar chain. But there's also from globe A, part of that life wave transfers to globe A of the Earth chain. And then when the life wave has transferred to globe B, when it's ready to transfer to globe C, part of that life wave of B transfers to globe B of the Earth chain, and part of it goes on the 7th round of the lunar chain to globe C.
Okay, what I heard you say is that the life wave travels around the 7 planets within that chain. But you're saying that that's, is your source saying that that's also a function of the transfer to the following chain? Or it's just the initial transfer? Because the standard teaching is that the life wave transfers from A, B, C, D, E, F, and G within the lunar chain, and that would then at the 7th round have been completed, and the transfer to the following chain, in this case the Earth chain, would commence, where you have globe to globe transfers via the Laya center in between. So if you're saying something more or different than that, let me know right now.
Okay, so are you saying that the 7th round of the lunar chain finishes before the transfer from globe A of the lunar chain to globe A of the Earth chain?
I don't know if it finishes or if it's a function of the 7th round as well. After all, there is life on globe G of each round, but of the 7th round, there would also be life on globe G, but is the main purpose of that life the transfer to the next chain? I just don't know. I don't remember reading whether that's the case or not, because the 7th is always synthesizing inherently. The globe G synthesizes the progress made from A to F.
What I think I was reading was that, say, going from globe A to B in the lunar chain on the 7th round, there's part of that life wave which hasn't evolved far enough to go on to globe B of the lunar chain, and that part then goes on to, that unevolved part goes on to globe A of the Earth chain.
Okay. What's your source? Because I don't maybe remember reading this in HBB.
I think part of this comes from the book Man, Whence, Where, and Whither by Leadbeater and Betsant.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think it may also come, I've read some things from Steiner, but I'm not sure whether this comes from Steiner also.
Right. Well, it makes sense that it could be. Frankly, I don't know that there's a way to have an opinion about such things, except for, to be so well versed that using logic, you could rule out certain transferences and include the possibility of others. And your description, it seems to me, is possible. For instance, you were saying that those, as it's almost like being held back, right, in grade school, so you have to continue your work on planet A of the next chain. But, for me, fundamentally, it's the great transfer to a whole new venue with a whole new purpose, ruled by a completely different planetary logoi from the previous chain that characterize this shift of the life wave, right? So by the time the seventh round comes around and all life has progressed through to planet G, and this is detailed in this section that we're now, just barely touching. This section, which is from, just catching the page number here, 155. Around this area, there's about 15 pages that describe this in great detail. That within this context, you get a sense of also how the kingdoms transfer, and how because each kingdom has its own process of moving through these globes as well. Let's see here. Let me get back to what we were. Yeah, we're here. And that is an important part of the picture as well. So, that's my reference for all of this life wave process of shifting from one to the other, is that 20 plus pages right at that section of Secret Doctrine. We went over it intensely in the webinar on Secret Doctrine. That would be now probably the beginning of last year or the year before that we were at that point, in the Secret Doctrine. But we were doing essentially the same kind of thing that we're doing now. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I just don't know about this idea of splitting. Because at the end, after, when the seventh round and the work within the chain has been completed, then it seems to me all the life wave would be transferred. There would be nothing gained by transferring to globe B. Now, if you're talking about at the beginning of the seventh round, then it seems to me that there would, again, be no purpose to transferring to the next chain until that round is completed. Those are just some thoughts off the top. Deanna.
Hi.
Hi.
I remember Michael Robbins said that the source of our humanity or the human kingdom could be from the three different sources. One of these was from the globe D lunar chain to our global D in the Earth chain. And
Right.
another came directly from the ABCD, from the
Earth chain.
normal evolution from the Earth chain. And I don't remember the third case.
The third is so that's the one that came directly from the Earth chain, is from the individualization and Lemurian race, which the bulk of humanity did. There was a group that didn't individualize until the Atlantean race on globe D, the previous race only individualized during that race. Though that would be the youngest and the last group of human beings to have individualized, right? So that first group that you describe would have individualized during the previous chain. You know, for instance, the Buddha is one of these that was actually an initiate in the previous chain. You know, there's very little information given about individuals in the previous chain. But that's one piece that we did get, you know, and therefore when his life wave passed to globe D, he was already initiate. And eventually the Christ caught up with him in terms of the initiation, and they worked together in the present, right? Bit different topic, but it's under the same idea, you know, of this life transference. Yes, Carol.
I've always found it a little confusing. So the moon we see, is it one of those globes, A
Here it
through D?
is. Here it
It's
is.
D?
It's D of the lunar chain. And I'm going to be talking about that coming up. I single that out as a point of reference. This is our Earth, you know, the D plus here. That's our Earth. These are both the D globes of two chains, right?
And was there a Mars chain before, and are we also seeing the D of that chain?
Mars chain, I believe, is chain number 6. So that is yet to come.
Oh, later. Okay. I mean,
Right.
in the
This,
future.
the first chain was the Neptune chain, then the Venus chain. So, yeah.
And which chain are we? Number?
We're number 4, and it's the Earth chain, and we're the Earth globe of that chain.
Yeah, I knew we were on that, but we're the 4th chain that there's been.
That's right. Yeah, we're the densest of the dense point, right? The middle chain, the middle globe, and just one past the middle root race makes us the densest, except for that we have begun the evolutionary half of our entire Earth scheme, which is really extraordinary if you think about it. You know,
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, Gordon, I couldn't give you a more definitive answer, but that's, you know, just, it's like an ongoing discussion here on that.
Yeah, yes, I know we'll need more information to really understand what exactly going on.
Yeah. It would be worth reading those pages, before and after page 155, as a foundation for that further reading, because that represents the heart of HPB's teaching on this subject. Okay, where in the heck are we here? So next up, and now it will be easy to imagine further globe A of the lunar chain informing globe A of the terrestrial chain and dying. So first we have the beginning of the transference of the life wave from one chain to the next, when globe 1, or A, quote, sends all its energy and principles into a neutral center of latent force, thus initiating a chain pralaya, after that pralaya, the life wave is transferred to globe A, or 1 of the new chain. All right. Next, globe B of the former, sending after that its energy into globe B of the new chain. So we have this, and then globe C of the, excuse me, then globe C of the lunar creating its progeny sphere C of the terrene chain. So we might hypothesize that each of these globe transferences includes an intermediate Leia center. She doesn't tell us that. She just mentions the one for the first globe, where a globe pralaya occurs before the final transfer to the new chain. And finally, then the moon, our satellite, pouring forth into the lowest globe of our planetary ring, globe D, our Earth, all its life, energy, and powers, and having transferred them to a new center, becoming virtually a dead planet, in which rotation has almost ceased since the birth of our globe. Same method of transference, but this time the source globe is the moon, and the receiver of the life wave is the Earth. The life wave of each globe sequentially moves into Pralaya, that Lea's center of abstraction, where they remain for some time before reemerging to inhabit a new globe on a new chain. Some schools of thought chart these Lea centers in a system of 12 globes, 7 manifest, 5 pralayak, and associate them with the 12 astrological signs. But this method is not mentioned in the blue books. Okay, any final thoughts or questions about the transference of the life wave from one chain to the next? You know, it's not about remembering the specific details as much as the overall sense of how the life wave from one chain moves to the next, you know, through the sequential series of transferences from globes 1 through 7. Okay, back to the footnote. How are we doing? Oh, we're over. I got carried away. Okay, we'll pick up here. It's a good place to stop anyway. I wanted to finish that section.